Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to how to build a road, and it's from Wendover Productions. Somehow they've managed to make a 20-minute video from this, but I do enjoy the channel, and that is pretty much it. I just know there's like people that joke around how long they'll like make a video about something that could be explained in probably 2-3 minutes, but you know what, I'm not going to complain. I do enjoy the channel a lot, and yeah, I mean, I think it's a road in the US somewhere because on the thumbnail it showed that, but I don't know where it is. But yeah, we're going to see. Hopefully going to enjoy. Links are in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some more of my reactions that I can't post to YouTube for copyright reasons. My voice is going. I don't know if it's worse than it was from when I started videos today, but I've been doing like recordings for a good 40 minutes now, so, or 50 minutes, so it is struggling. It's on its last legs, but this is the last video for today. So, oh fucking hell, last video for today. So yeah, hopefully I can just about survive, and then it can rest it up. But we're gonna check this out. Hopefully going to enjoy, and let's just see how we build a road.
So you want to build a road. First is perhaps the most impossible feat, finding a route. That's because roads have a particular shape that Earth often does not. Both linearly and laterally, they're fairly flat, but not completely flat. Flat roads are dangerous. A flat turn will increase the potential of a car skidding off, so road designers slope the corners inward to counteract centripetal force and give the car more friction.
I didn't know
The higher
that.
the speed and the sharper
Makes sense though. I mean, I guess I'm gonna say gravity. Maybe it's not gravity, but
the turn, the more slope the turn needs, meaning there is a theoretically safest slope for a turn. The American Federal Highway Administration has a formula that converts design speed and turn radius into a suggested slope, but that's only their interpretation of it. Road designers and mathematicians endlessly shoot academic papers back and forth debating the merits of this and other superelevation formulas. Some suggest more severe banking on turns to accommodate the higher centers of gravity of trucks. Others argue that steeper slopes are not worth the benefit due to the issues they create for slower moving vehicles in the event of snow and ice, and it gets far more complex than that. But this is all largely irrelevant because, at the very most, the sideways slope will be about 12%, but it's normally quite a bit less, and it's only on corners, so overall, a relatively flat cross-section is needed regardless. Linearly, in the direction of travel, even less of a slope is tolerated. In order to allow heavily loaded trucks to safely climb and descend, highways should rise or fall no more than 6 vertical feet or meters for every 100 horizontal. So, in combination, the narrow accepted range of linear and lateral slopes presents a challenge when you need a road to go over this: Colorado's Rocky Mountains.
okay, I can understand now, because this would be one hard ass place to build a road, because you got to go over all these different terrain areas in the cold. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one then.
Originally, America's interstate designers didn't dare attempt to traverse these peaks. I-70 was originally supposed to end in Denver, leaving the state as the only in the region without a trans-mountain interstate. After intense lobbying, though, Washington relented. Designers would have to find a route through. The E. Lionel Pavlo Engineering Company was tasked with—
Do you think if the US had the Himalayas just where that is, they would have just done the same thing? Because surely they would have been like, yeah, we're still going to try and find a way to get through here, because it's just sort of part of the engineering, like how tough it is, but that's also sort of that kind of, I guess that's kind of a challenge that I guess maybe the US and other countries as well, like maybe like somewhere like, I wouldn't say Dubai because they haven't got mountains and stuff, but they just like to not go against the norm, but just like do some engineering marvel which wouldn't seem possible. I mean, I'm sure there are roads in the Himalayas. I don't know, but I'm just gonna assume there is. But yeah, we're gonna see anyway, because I'm just sort of bringing up that as a sort of idea. Be interesting to think about, but
identifying the cheapest, flattest route through the mountains. 1 year later, they returned with these 7 options. At first glance, the northern route seemed best, as it best subscribed to one of the most tried and tested road routing shortcuts: rivers. You see, any route through the mountains is going to require a certain amount of earthwork. If the slope is perpendicular to the road, you cut a flat section into the slope at great expense. By one estimate, a 50% slope doubles construction cost. But using earth to achieve the required gradient in the linear direction is even more expensive, simply due to the sheer distance and volume of earth involved. So, considering they're either going to need to flatten linearly or laterally, road builders would much rather do so laterally. The best place
why does it always pop up?
to find routes like this is by rivers. That's because they typically center mountain valleys and fall rather gradually. For example, the mighty Colorado River only drops about a mile of elevation across the 280 it traverses through the state, despite being surrounded by terrain steep enough for a mile of elevation gain to occur over a mile of horizontal distance. The gentle riverside linear gradient is perfect for road construction, leaving the primary gradient correction to the lateral direction, which can be done at lesser expense. Therefore, on a per-mile basis, this northern route was far cheaper and less complex. The only section that couldn't easily sit at a reasonable grade was here, traversing the Continental Divide, where they'd need to build a tunnel. But after that, the road would follow the Fraser and Colorado rivers, each shepherding a flat, mellow path through the mountains. But the Pavlo Engineering Company didn't ultimately suggest this route. Its justification was first that this northern area of Colorado was relatively sparsely populated, even by Rocky Mountain standards, meaning this route would be of lesser use to those actually living in the state rather than traversing. And perhaps more crucially, even with the relatively simple geography, it was a far longer, less direct route. This meant that, even though the southern route would require traversing 2 high elevation passes rather than 1, Pavlo thought it could be built for some $55 million less. It would just require some creativity. Inevitably, this route too would require a tunnel. That's because it crossed the Continental Divide, the geographic split between the side of the country where rivers drain into the Atlantic
Do tunnels not cost more though? I thought making a tunnel would cost a lot more, but I guess not.
and the side where they drain into the Pacific. Inherently, rivers from one side don't connect to those on the other, meaning there generally are not mellow mountain valleys for roads to follow up and across the divide. There's simply a wall of massively high, massively steep peaks, meaning traversing it was going to require either a massive feat of engineering to create an interstate standard road climbing up to nearly 12,000 feet or 3,700
That would be crazy.
meters, or the construction of the world's highest elevation road tunnel at 11,000 feet or 3,400 meters. Incredibly, given the gradients and weather in the area, the tunnel was ultimately selected as the more practical option. That left the other pass. The interstate was definitely going to go through Silverthorne, and it was definitely going to go through Vail, but standing between the two towns was a similarly formidable stretch of mountains. Initially, the answer was to just go straight, climb up this valley, then tunnel under Red Buffalo Pass. This would require building a similarly daunting tunnel, but it would keep the highway on its straight, efficient route through the state.
Already, I'm just thinking this highway must have caused quite a few, not caused the deaths, but there must have been so many accidents on this highway that I guess led to falling off these high areas. I mean, I don't know, but I'm just imagining that could have been a possibility and almost a certainty, to be honest.
The only issue was that the land surrounding this pass was part of the Forest Service's Eagle's Nest Wilderness Area, a stretch of pristine protected nature that was not supposed to be disturbed by anything. This, along with the ascent of the environmental movement more broadly, led to massive public pushback. They argued that it was bad enough for the highway to be disturbing the environmentally sensitive area at all, but for it to pass through one of the highest categories of protected land was simply untenable. As the official in charge of the Forest Service, the final call rested in the hands of Orville Freeman, the Secretary of Agriculture. In a shock decision, after alignment planning had already started on the Red Buffalo route, he said no. I-70 would have to divert elsewhere.
Fair enough.
The alternative was clear: Vail Pass. With its more manageable gradients and comparatively lower 10,600 foot, 3,200 meter elevation, this route could actually be navigated without a tunnel. The downside was that the 10 miles or 16 kilometers in added length would lead to an estimated 94 cents in additional fuel and maintenance cost for every driver.
Oh,
But
damn.
at least, after years of debate, study, surveying,
There's pros and cons, right? Obviously, that's obviously a very big negative, but then the pros are that place has been untouched and it's just left to how it is, how it was before.
and consensus building, finally, Colorado's Trans Mountain Interstate had a route. Now, they just needed to turn it into reality. Up to this point, much of the work had been done from top down. When it's time to build, though, this orientation flips as road construction happens one layer at a time from the bottom up. Vail Pass is undeniably steep, but by Rocky Mountain standards, not impossibly steep. In fact, while the section from Vail to Vail Pass reaches a grade over the preferred range of 0 to 6%, the pass averages roughly a Colorado comfortable 4.5% grade. Linear grade, in other words, was a challenge, but the lateral would prove an even bigger headache. To transform undulating, unruly topography into a uniform transportation throughway, planners start by turning in their overhead projections for a map of a different sort, a side cut. Now it's time to create a path flat enough and wide enough for a road. This starts with building a road base, which in turn requires the earth-moving processes of cutting and filling. Processes straightforward enough that their name does most of the explaining. Fill earth where it's needed, and cut away where it isn't. At its simplest, cutting and filling begins first with surveying in the field, then with measurements made, moves to paper, becoming an exercise in rudimentary math. First, the proposed route is broken into 100-foot or 30-meter sections called stations. Then, at each station or half station, planners look at the side cut and figure out where dirt needs to be added and where it needs to be removed. If a road's going into a hillside, for instance, the cut will be on the uphill side, the fill on the downhill side, with the earth from the cut being moved to the fill. On flat land, there's likely to be more fill than cut, as a road will be positioned to sit higher than its surroundings so water will shed off the road's shoulder rather than pool. Once the amount of earth required to move is figured out at one particular station, it's on to the next station to do the same math, then the next after that. And once all these values are figured out, the planner now has a rough sense as to how much earth will need to be moved and how much time, material, and money it will cost across the entire length of the roadway. According to a Florida Department of Transportation cost estimating model, this part of the process, cutting and filling or excavating and embanking for a divided 4-lane highway across a rural landscape, would cost in itself over $1 million a mile, which makes up
$1 million a mile, oh my days.
nearly a quarter of the per mile price. Though a task that's easy to wrap one's head around, it's one that requires a fundamental reshaping of a landscape and thus a lot of money. And this estimate's for the flat state of Florida, not Colorado, a state where protruding peaks and a rocky disposition make it easy for earth-moving costs to shoot a mile high. Before I-70 crested over Vail Pass, it was US
That is a beautiful flipping motorway though. I mean, I've just seen loads already, but the scenery is insane.
Highway 6, a small 2-lane road cut into the north side of the canyon that was notorious for its sharp turns and difficult driving. It was dangerous to the point that motorists often avoided it, opting for the smoother, safer, but exceptionally indirect US 40. To build a bigger road, effectively 2 US 6s, while making the road safe enough to move unfamiliar Americans across at a 60-mile-per-hour clip, there would need to be a lot more earthwork. But in such a tight space, and such a pristine and delicate environment, there would also be major constraints. The first was this tiny creek. While a waterway that only a fraction of Coloradans can actually name, Blackgore Creek was and is critical to the communities below, filling the recreational reservoirs near the pass, supplying drinking water to Vail, and eventually dedicating its flow to a section of creek below the town of Vail that's earned the distinction as a gold medal water for trout fishing. Blackgore Creek is important. Locals knew as much and federal planners knew as much, so when it came to figure out where to flatten out enough space for a road base, the question of what it would do to the watershed became an important one. Runoff is a tricky business in road building. It first presents a challenge during construction, but handled improperly will remain a challenge for the lifespan of a road. On Vail Pass, this challenge was exacerbated by perpetually sandy soils, rapid snowmelt in late spring, and pounding rainfall in midsummer. With the passage of the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970, I-70 contractors were just beginning to understand environmental impact statements and pollution laws when they were awarded contracts to get the interstate over the mountain. Now, rather than just being fast, they had to be diligent too, or face the fines. City officials downstream from the project, for their part, were concerned about construction, as the loose soil at the pass was already silting up the town's water supply before any construction tore out grass and vegetation upslope. So contractors, as they do today, meticulously tested the water to ensure that sediment hadn't risen to unacceptable levels under their watch. To keep these levels low during construction, teams placed hay bales and sandbags to slow runoff and direct it to settlement basins. Water would inevitably make it to the stream, but if they slowed it and let the particles settle to the bottom, it wouldn't carry too much dirt down with it. But these are temporary problems with temporary fixes. There's also the challenge of dealing with water once a road's complete, and this is such a critical concern of road building that the US Department of Transportation Project Development and Design Manual dedicates an entire chapter to the subject of water.
Wow.
Basically, the question this entire chapter revolves around is how to best move water around and off roadways without ruining the nearby surroundings. The answer begins above the cut and starts during the construction phase. The very moment a road base is established, it's a race to revegetate the slope above the road with grasses and shrubbery that will hold the land in place when it rains. Generally, planners look to keep the uphill slope no steeper than a ratio of 2 to 1. For every 2 units the slope extends horizontally, it may safely rise 1. With a harsher environment, Vale Pass planners opted for slopes of 2.5 to 1 or less, and to give grasses their best chance, sprayed hillsides with mulch on the steepest sections and placed netting to help the seed take hold. For natural depressions that served as drainages for the hillsides, teams placed thirsty willows and boulders to both naturalize the landscape and slow the flow.
Okay.
On Vale Pass, and generally in highway construction, builders will make the most of these perpendicular drainages and actually cut uphill ditches running parallel with the road to divert runoff headed for highway to the drainage, then below via culvert. Where applicable, paralleling ditches, culverts, and revegetation have proved tried and true techniques to manage runoff and mitigate erosion in Colorado and elsewhere. But in the narrow confines below the pass, neither simple cut and fills nor their drainage systems were always applicable. To ensure that road fill wouldn't spill into Black Gore or 10 Mile Creek, planners instead opted for retaining walls. Where rock formations made a smooth 2-to-1 cut impossible, explosives blasted sheer walls out of troublesome rock formations, while netting and planted topsoil placed above mitigated future rockfall. And most unique to this particular section of interstate are the sections neither blown into the rock nor cut into the mountainside, but the 23 separate sections of the interstate that float across the landscape on bridges that were placed to account for the fact that almost the entire road from Vale to the pass sits on a fault line and a series of still shifting historical landslides.
Oh my days.
With the cuts and
There's just never-ending problems.
fills, the exposed rock cuts, and the bridges, this section of roadway is practically a highway building handbook on its own, and as an exemplary road of nearly every trick and technique available to road engineers, it wasn't cheap. When Vale Pass was proudly dedicated in 1978, estimates put the cost of the 24-mile, 39-kilometer section at an estimated $91 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's nearly $427 million total, $18 million per mile, or $11 million per kilometer. And yet, with all that money spent, driving over Vale Pass doesn't feel as if you're passing over an engineering marvel that's conquered a landscape, but rather a road that almost seems a part of it. With a delicate landscape front of mind, while crossing Forest Service land,
Bro, certain seasons driving on this road, I mean, certain parts already look scary as it is, but with the snow added on top, oh my days.
connecting ski resorts and a host of other recreation hotspots,
Wait, they've created ski resorts?
while crossing Forest Service land and connecting ski resorts and a host of other recreation hotspots, every last detail along the pass, from the red-tinged concrete to match the local rock, boulders strewn across revegetation areas, and Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired retaining walls to the manner in which rock was blasted to make it look more natural, this section of interstate was built to fit the landscape and the values of the area around it. Something that's not lost on contemporary planners who have carefully codified these specific design traits for future additions or alterations on the pass. In this way though, I-70 is the same as any other road, designed uniquely to fit its environment and best serve a particular purpose. But even once designed and built for that environment, the environment is constantly shifting, which means that roads, especially those as complex as I-70, need constant management in order to stay safe. With its tight turns, steep gradients, and volatile weather, the entirety of this road is treacherous, but with their inherent
Bro, this is the same road. Driving on this in the winter does not look fun. There's nothing you can even see either, mate. I would be driving on this when it's the nicest possible conditions would be beautiful, but also certain areas would sketch me out a little bit. I mean, to be fair, it's probably the flattest area, so it's not as bad as that. It's just beautiful. I wonder if people have crashed just from looking at the scenery and then just sort of being like, oh, I'm not focusing on the road here.
Currently limited resources, the Colorado Department of Transportation focuses its efforts most on the sections that are most dangerous and most disruptive to close down. Eisenhower Tunnel, that highest road tunnel in the US, is one such spot. Even under the best conditions, the slower speeds of the tunnel turn it into a choke point that causes massive, notorious traffic backlogs. If the tunnel closes, an entire interstate's worth of traffic must divert onto the winding, treacherous 2-lane Loveland Pass, which turns a bad traffic situation catastrophic. But there simply are not alternatives. The next shortest diversion is 2 hours long over another treacherous mountain pass, so CDOT does everything.
Oh my god, you have to go all the way around here just to get back here. That's brutal. I'm not gonna lie, that is absolutely brutal.
Everything possible to keep Eisenhower Tunnel open. This starts with some controversial rules. Hazmat trucks carrying fuel, chemicals, or other hazardous materials are not allowed through the tunnel.
That's fair enough, I guess.
The logic is that a fuel tanker fire, for instance, would be absolutely catastrophic in such an enclosed space. While the tunnel does have its own fire department that can handle smaller
The tunnel has its own fire department. God damn, they are prepared.
Incidents. Its remote location means that getting full resources to combat such a hazmat incident could take hours, in which time the tunnel could be damaged to an extent that could take months or years to fix, let alone the risks to any drivers trapped inside. What this means is that hazmat trucks must take the treacherous Loveland Pass instead, which CDOT plows up to its near 12,000 foot, 3,700 meter peak all through the winter.
That doesn't sound like a fun job. Driving a big truck like that on one of these, nah.
Making it Colorado's highest year-round road.
Wow.
Of course, navigating a fuel tanker up a steep, winding road to 12,000 feet in the middle of a Colorado winter is far from safe, so trucking industry advocates argue that this policy is effectively trading the safety of truck drivers for the convenience of ski commuters, but after a recent feasibility study reevaluating the policy, CDOT maintains that it's the best balance of safety overall.
I can understand it, but that is also brutal. I mean, this driving a truck this big around one of these areas, it sounds like it could be a pretty rough prospect.
But even I-70 itself is plenty treacherous in the winter. After all, this is the highest elevation section of interstate in the US. Given their proximity to the Continental Divide, both sides of the tunnel are flanked by steep mountain faces, and with steep mountain faces come avalanches. This is Mount Bethel, and these two tree-free corridors are the telltale signs of an avalanche path. If an avalanche were to trigger without warning, the snow and debris could bury the roadway for hours or even days, and potentially even bury people. Therefore, CDOT triggers avalanches themselves. At the start of each winter, the department positions Obelix trigger devices at the top of slide paths on each side of the tunnel. These remotely triggered egg-shaped capsules shoot out a concussive blast from the bottom that, if the conditions are right, trigger an avalanche in the snow below. This allows CDOT to close the interstate during a low traffic period to assure nobody gets caught up, and trigger avalanches regularly enough that no single slide will catastrophically bury the roadway. But especially in a landscape like Colorado's, the priority list of road safety issues is constantly shifting, meaning CDOT has to adapt. In recent years, Glenwood Canyon, 80 minutes to the west, has become the interstate's new most sensitive section. It follows the Colorado River through a deep canyon with 1,000-foot walls, and in the event of a closure, there is simply no viable diversion route. What normally takes 30 minutes turns into a 4-hour trek across rural 2-lane roads, effectively cutting off the entire western slope from Denver. But in 2020, the road was shut for 13 days as a wildfire swept through the...
So there's avalanches here, and there's also wildfire. Like, how is there both? Wildfires and avalanches. Flipping hell, man. You can have both sides of the... It's just both sides of the, like, both different ends of the spectrum in terms of the weather. It's just complete opposites. What the hell?
Canyon, and even that was the least of its issues.
Fuck.
As the fire burned the plant life whose roots kept soil in place, rainstorms cascaded into massive mudslides that would bury the road and potentially drivers. Unlike avalanches, mudslides can't be remotely triggered during a managed closure, forcing CDOT to rather close the highway whenever heavy rain was forecasted, bifurcating the state just by the threat of weather. With shifting threats and ever-changing demand, managing a road like I-70 is an endless job. CDOT and its personnel constantly face new challenges to keep this crucial conduit flowing. After all, it's a road whose existence
The scenery is incredible, though. Come on.
was once thought impossible, but considering its impossible existence has transformed the entire state's economy and human geography, its operation is now just simply crucial.
I mean, the maintenance of this road is something that it goes beyond any other thing I can imagine. I mean, I feel like this is probably the most, in terms of like roads, the most like they've got to like spend the most time trying to keep it as functionable and safe as possible. The amount of research needed to summarize the thought process of forgotten civil engineers from decades ago. What? Instructions unclear. Built a runway instead. These videos are always so informative, but living in the mountains of Colorado always makes sound videos 10 times as interesting. The stretch of I-70 west of Denver is probably the most beautiful stretch of country of interstate. If you've never driven, you should. It does look beautiful, man. Some of the images look incredible, but the winter drives do not look fun. I mean, some of those images, like the view, you can't see anything. Obviously, you're driving on ice and stuff. It just it does seem a bit rough, but it is an incredible road, to be fair. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. If you drove on this road, I guess let me know your thoughts. Does it compare to other roads you've driven on? I've seen like videos. I remember watching Top Gear. They drove on like the most dangerous road. It was somewhere in Asia, but that was just a different level because there was just no real safety things and like there's barely any space. And if there's a truck coming by, you have to like proper park up to the side. Or if you're on the outside, you just gotta hope they don't crash into you. It's a different level. Like this is at least built in a way where there's safety features here and stuff, with also the great views and all that. But it's a fascinating thing, and yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. And until next time, peace.